Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of Jam's Tea Podcast, where we spill the jams and spill the tea with another end of the year video, where today we're talking about something that we've never actually done before. We are going to do a new type of video where we talk about some of our favorite EPs released inside of this particular year. They are a format that is worthy of our attention. Lots of great stuff released over the year, and it would be a pity if we had to leave those things out, if we had to adhere to the rules strictly of just having to talk about albums. So, new video format.
Ignore the fact that we talked about EPs in our worst albums of the year video. Just ignore that completely. Our albums...
We're not going to do a worst EPs video. That's getting too in the minutiae even for us.
Our albums of the year video, which will be coming soon as well, is going to be just albums. So we did want to carve out an extra space to talk about some releases from the less conventional format, the format for more concise, smaller scale packagings of songs, and sort of just talk about releases and artists. We're going to talk about a number of artists who, had they actually put out an album this year, that would likely be represented on one of our other lists, but they're either in between album cycles or they're just not really in album mode at the moment, but they've still put out music that we think is worthy of a shout out, and also that you may or may not have heard, because EPs don't get quite the level of attention that albums do. So you might not be aware of some of these, and you should check them out. Anyway, before we get into the countdown themselves, we've each got a few honorable mentions we want to shout out as well. I'll just very quickly shout a couple of mine. These are EPs that I think are basically just as good as the ones that are featured on my list, but that for the sake of us restricting it to 5 each, I decided to leave off. I won't talk about them in any detail. I just kind of want to mention them in passing. The first is the new Liturgy EP, As the Blood of God Bursts the Veins of Time. Fantastic new direction for Liturgy, developing on the sound that Hunter Hunt Hendricks has displayed in previous releases. This is a great EP, definitely worthy of my top 5, but I chose to leave it off because the entirety of this EP is actually going to feature on the next Liturgy album anyway, which is supposed to come out in March. So we'll get to talk about it anyway.
Same reason it didn't feature on mine.
I will also shout out as well the EP or the compilation of singles from Floating Points, Someone Close as well, that came out this year. I am not as huge on Floating Points as minimal techno stuff as I am on some of the more ornate orchestral stuff, like the record that he did with the London Contemporary Orchestra and Pharaoh Sanders back in 2020. I think that's an amazing record, but I still enjoyed the fact that Floating Point still decided to go back and make a little bit of the sort of quartet-esque minimal techno that he originally came up on. And I think the new songs that he put out this year were pretty good for the most part, and they're compiled neatly into this little compilation that I recommend if you want a taste of that side of him. That was a pretty good release as well. I also want to shout out the fact that the great emo band Origami Angel put out 2 EPs this year. The first was called Return and the second was called Depart, and they are both quite distinct shades of Origami Angel's emo pop acoustic rock sound. Return is much more along the lines of what I've just said, a kind of pleasant, upbeat, peppy and very hook laden emo EP with 3 great songs on it. And then Depart is a complete left turn into metalcore and hardcore punk music. Essentially, that is a completely different side of Origami Angel. Likewise, 3 really short tracks. They're each less than 2 minutes long. There are great sides to this band, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how those different aspects of their sound may do or do not come to inform whatever comes next from them. So that was a really, really good duo of EPs that I really very much enjoyed this year as well. And most of the other ones that I enjoyed are actually either represented in Jake's list or in Jake's honorable mentions. So Jake, I'll turn to you now for your honorable mentions.
My honorable mentions. First off, I'm going to give it to Gospel's new EP. They had two major releases this year. The album that we were all pretty fond of, and the incredibly longly titled but abbreviated MVDM. This is a fantastic release from the band that really kind of fully delves into the progressive side of their sound. Sounds closer to Dream Theater than it does any of the like post-hardcore screamo stuff that they came from. So new facet of a great band that everyone should look into. It's just as quality of release as anything else that they've put out. Also going to shout out two projects from member and ex-member of this podcast. August, his project with his partner Mason Glacier Flower. They put out two twin EPs this year, Infinite Past and Infinite Future. They're both very, very good. My preferred EP was Infinite Past. These are sort of reworked versions of songs they had made before, or songs that they just had in the pipeline that they sort of got really creative with and like fundamentally changed into something really experimental and really cool. So if you want to hear them get really ambitious and do something very different from the stuff that they've done before, absolutely check these things out. Other project from Saoirse for Saoirse and the Agenda, her newest EP, No One Achieves Their Dreams. Another great selection of punk rock, folk punk-ish songs from Saoirse. If you enjoyed any of the material on her previous record that we talked about, you're going to enjoy this as well. Another fun release. And I'm also going to shout out the EP from rock band Anne Berlin, their newest EP, Silverline, their first material since their last album, Lowborn, which was assumedly going to be their final release, but they've sort of come back. They've got these new songs, really fun alt rock, sort of post-hardcore adjacent and slight elements of power pop, fun stuff. Just, fans of traditional rock music, not exactly something that's at the forefront of music right now, but you will find yourself a great treat with Anne Berlin's music, and hopefully they will have some new material on the way. And those are the honorable mentions that I have.
All right, fantastic. And I basically second all of those as well. I enjoyed to varying degrees all of those honorable mentions of yours as well. So you and I are, I think, on the same page with quite a few different releases today. But one of my favorite things about doing these videos, where it's just you and me, is that you really get a sense from our separate picks of our individual musical personalities and the sorts of things that we gravitate towards, and the areas in which we overlap as well. Without further ado, let's get into our 5 favorite EPs of the year. We're going to count them down interchangeably, starting from our respective number 5s. My number 5 goes to an EP from a shoegaze indie rock band based in Flint, Michigan called Greet Death, who put out one of my favorite albums of 2019, the absolutely colossal New Hell. And they're back with an EP called New Low, which is actually kind of compiles a series of singles that they put out throughout 2021 and 2022. And I've been following the release of these songs because, as I said, New Hell is, I think, one of the best albums of 2019. Incredible, gnarly shoegaze record that will really appeal to people who like bands like Have a Nice Life. Really kind of depressive, just lingering in your worst emotions kind of shoegaze music. And so what really intrigued me about the singles, or these sort of loose songs that the band released over the last couple of years, is that a number of them actually veered away from the kind of gnarly, noisy shoegaze that I'd come to expect from them, and into things like alt country, more traditional indie rock, folk music straight up. Like, you had songs like Your Love is Alcohol, Punishment, Existence, and I Hate Everything, classic Great Death song there, that really pushed away from the restrictions of the singular aesthetic mold that New Hell came out of. And it was quite refreshing to see. And then ultimately, the last single that they dropped standalone was the song Panic Song, which is dropped in March of this year. And I actually didn't catch this one until the EP was out itself, and I caught up with the EP recently. And this is one of my favorite songs of the year in general. It is an incredible shoegaze banger, just irresistible guitar licks, incredible energy and emotion. Feels like it's halfway between like a classic, deep cut off of Yola Tengo's I Can Hear the Heart Beating as One or Electro Pura meets something a little bit more modern in the vein of sad indie rock and shoegaze. The guitar is so good in this song. I've been listening to it so much recently. That in combination with the one newly released song on the EP, which is the title track, New Low, which is a classic piece of sludgy shoegaze like you would come to expect from this band. It's just a really great 5-song EP. There's not a single miss on it. It really showcases the diversity of what this band can do. And really, more than anything, I just wanted to give this band particular shine because their 2019 album was one of the albums I listened to the most that year, and I really hope that they get to release a new record sometime soon so that we can review it and talk about it on the show and hopefully give them a little bit bigger of an audience. So if you haven't heard of this band, or if you're not really all that familiar, the new EP is a great way of dipping your toes and just a really great selection of songs that showcase skill in different avenues of indie rock that really prove this band are not just a one-off and are here to stay. So that's my number 5 pick.
The first EP I'm going to shout out here is the self-titled EP Dream Widow. And this is a project from Foo Fighters frontman Dave Grohl. And a bit of a tragic circumstance of the release of this EP is that I think it was kind of overshadowed by the fact that this was released on the same day that Taylor Hawkins died. So there wasn't really any like room for this to be like, oh, hey, this is a thing that's happening. So I think this, had the potential to be a little bit bigger, even though I think what's cool about this is that it is so starkly different from anything that Dave has ever done. If it does have any similarities, it's probably to his project Probot, an album I've spoke about before on the podcast as being a collaboration where on each of the songs he collaborates with a different sort of old head metal musician to make a specific kind of metal song, like Lemmy Kilmister, the frontman of Voivod, for example. And basically Dave, drums his ass off on that project. But here on Dream Widow, he fully embraces different kinds of metal, and it's really him at like sort of star of the show. There are other people who are sort of assisting him from like a mixing standpoint, but like from like all accounts, this is basically the Dave Grohl show. And basically it is a showcase of the incredible versatility that Dave has as a heavy musician, which, Foo Fighters can certainly get heavy occasionally, but they're not a band that is known for being particularly metallic. So this is sort of Dave getting to cut loose a little bit in this 42-minute long, fairly substantial project where each song is more or less a different interpretation of a different kind of metal. There's thrash metal, there's doom metal, there's stoner metal, there's death metal, there's some alt metal, there's even some black metal on here in the final song on here, Lacrimus de Ebrius, a 10-minute long black metal epic, and it's fucking fantastic. Dave is such a great sort of instrumentalist from every standpoint. Like, of course the drumming is fantastic, the guitar work is great, and I think the standout element on here is actually the vocals. Him doing sort of screamed, screechy black metal vocals it fits him like a glove. It's like he's been doing it for years, and it's a real treat to sort of see this musician who's very tightly reined in normally just get to cut loose a little bit and sort of exercise his incredible versatility that you wouldn't necessarily suspect that he has. Like, there are tracks on here like the opening track Encino, Cold, March of the Insane. All of these are just absolute fucking bangers. This is a highlight in terms of just fun metal releases this year, and it's a really substantive project. Like, some of the EPs we'll talk about don't even get to like 10 minutes long, whereas this is, again, a full 42 minutes, and there's never really a moment where it kind of lets you down. There are some songs on here that I like less than the others, but this is worth it just for all of the terrific highlights. If you are a fan of any kind of heavy music in general, you are going to find something that you like on here. And just, support the boy, Dave Grohl, one of the, I think, modern music's most likable figures.
My number 4 pick as long as we've been doing this podcast, not since the very beginning, but certainly since the start of last year, it's almost inadvertently become a living document of the progression of a new wave of music, essentially. And this is the kind of fifth wave emo adjacent, shoegaze adjacent, bedroom music of the Longinus Recordings label, essentially. We have reviewed so many of the releases of this label ever since the most significant release from this label, which was Parannoul's album To See the Next Part of the Dream, dropped in March of last year. And we've kind of become this sort of living document of the progression of a lot of the artists. I mean, not that there's very many artists, there's only I think 3 of them on the label at the moment. There might be a 4th. So every time one of the artists on this label, generally either one of Parannoul, Asian Glow, or Sonhos Tomum Conta, releases music, you could guarantee the Jams and Tea podcast will be there to at the very least shout it out, make you aware of its existence. And honestly, there is a wealth of material for me to consider. I mean, for any end of year list this year, but even just for focusing in on EPs alone, because you had from Parannoul early in the year, you had the White Ceiling, Black Dots Wandering Around EP, which is kind of like To See the Next Part of the Dream leftovers. It included a 17-minute demo of the song White Ceiling, which is just like, if you remember how epic that song was on that album, this 17-minute version will blow your fucking dick off, or any analogous genital area. So there were great songs on that EP. I mean, it's a 46-minute EP, hilarious. But so there was that in the running immediately. That came out very early in the year this year. Really been enjoying that throughout the year. You had the collaborative EP between Asian Glow and Weatherday, another kind of underground sort of noise pop emo artist who's been making waves in their own right for the last few years as well. They came together for a collaborative EP called Weatherglow, which was a fantastic EP. I thought really centered the strengths of both artists. And Weatherday is an artist I haven't fully been in love with yet, but I feel like I started to appreciate them more and more on this EP than I had before, so that was really exciting. So that was a great EP as well. You even have the Cover Glow EP that Asian Glow released very recently of a variety of different covers that I haven't actually heard. But one of them is actually a cover of a Fishman song, Ikarita Baby, which I very much am interested in listening to as well. So there's just been so many releases, not to even mention the albums as well. We reviewed Asian Glow's fantastic album, Stalled Flutes Means, when that came out as well. Also, the other major artist on the Longinus Recordings label, Sonhos Tomum Conta, released an album, Maladaptive Daydreaming, and an EP, In Solação, I can't pronounce Portuguese, my apologies, that are both incredibly worth checking out as well. Some of the best music that either of those artists have put out. So, look, a great year for Longinus Recordings yet again, but the record that I want to choose, or the EP that I want to choose to represent these artists here, my number 4 EP of the year, is fittingly a collaboration between Parannoul and Asian Glow, Paraglow. This EP came out in September, so it's much later than most of the other releases this year that I have mentioned, so I haven't had as much time to spend with it, but coming back to it this week as well, fully cemented that this is my favorite release that any Longinus Recordings artist has put out this year. This is a fantastic EP that really utilizes the strengths of both artists tremendously. It opens with Hand, which is a fantastic collaborative track that would have fit right in on the Downfall of the Neon Youth split album that they put out in 2020 as well. Another one of our albums of 2021 as well. Another one of our albums of that year. You get slightly more electronic tracks that feel like they have a little bit more backbone and a little bit more crispness to the production that I really like Light Side of the Eyes and Neo Up. And you have the 15-minute epic Wheel, one of the best songs that either artist have ever put out, that rounds this EP out and absolutely is the standout by far of across either artist's release schedule this year. So this EP is just, it really hones and highlights the strengths of both artists, and it pushes them to refine their already established sound in new ways and lets them play off each other in ways that I really like as well. So yeah, even if you're not all that familiar with either of these artists, obviously go and check out the records that they put out in 2021. Cull Fickle and To See the Next Part of the Dream, and also the split album they did with Sonos Tone and Contra as well that I mentioned. Check those out for sure. But if you want an EP-sized, shorter taste that really showcases the strengths of both of these artists, you cannot miss with Paraglow. Absolutely essential listening.
All right. My next pick on my list is an EP that is probably the shortest EP that either of us are going to talk about, because it is only 2 songs, that being the Guitar Songs EP released by one Miss Billie Eilish. We talked about Billie's follow-up to her incredibly successful debut album, Happier Than Ever. I definitely think Ryley and I were the most in the bag for that particular release. So I'm following what she's doing very closely, just because I am a fan of basically everything she's made after that debut. And this just kind of snuck by as being something released that I didn't hear anything about, in terms of like, I just didn't see it like marketed or anybody releasing it. I just sort of saw it as a notification. And that feels fitting, just because this is a very plaintive, very kind of unadorned release, because this is 2 folk songs, essentially singer-songwriter sort of indie folk songs, that while they do have the sort of austere kind of sparkling gorgeousness that anything produced by Phineas does have, they are still very plain folk songs. And I am such a sucker for this particular kind of sound. Obviously, this is kind of echoing the sort of Boy Genius-esque Phoebe Bridgers kind of thing. And I think Billie wears this sound like a glove. And I doubt that she's going to full-blown pivot into a sound like this afterwards. So I feel like this is going to be particularly valuable as a bit of a novelty, maybe in her career, just because I don't see her going away from pop anytime soon. So getting to see her do this is a bit of an interesting window into her sound. And I just really love both of the songs released here. I think that TV is this really, that wouldn't be sort of out of place as a song that would be found on like Happier Than Ever, for example, a song about sort of loneliness and yearning, being in a sort of toxic relationship where you feel undervalued by the person that you're with. Just her doing traditionally what she does best. But the song on here that I really, really love, that I think is maybe Billie's best song, at least my favorite of hers, is the second song on here, The 30th, which is just an utterly heartbreaking, kind of expansive song about Billie in the sort of aftermath of a friend of hers almost dying after being in a car accident. And this is just a really harrowing song. It's beautifully constructed. I love the lyricism here. There's a sort of build in the sort of final third of this that goes into this incredible anticlimax that's just a great little subversion of structure that I think is just really, really captivating. I've listened to these 2 songs just over and over again so many nights. They have a great kind of atmosphere to them that I think is palpable in all of Billie's more sort of low-key nocturnal music, which this kind of cleanly slots into. It's a different sound for her, but it still feels very quintessentially her. It's nothing that's going to reinvent the wheel, obviously, but I think that these 2 songs sort of skirt by on the fundamentals of just really great, solid song construction that Billie sort of shows an improvement, I think, as a storyteller and as a lyricist on these songs, that I feel like really sets her up for maybe whatever she's going to do next to be a little bit more ambitious than what she's done in the past. So yeah, I really enjoyed this.
I enjoyed the CB too, and I thought it was like, in a lot of ways, when I heard it, TV felt like a natural continuation of Happier Than Ever. There's a lot of like the lyrical themes and present moment commentary in Billie's writing that I really, really enjoyed in that song as well. And it's funny, like, this is such a funny thing to bring up, but like when when I first heard Taylor Swift's Midnights, and I heard the song Anti-Hero, and it has that refrain of, it's me, I'm the problem. I immediately thought of the song TV, which ends with the outro where Billie is essentially saying, maybe I'm the problem, over and over again. And I couldn't help but wonder if maybe Taylor had taken the tiniest, teensiest bit of information from her fellow mega-selling pop star here on this very, very stripped back and just kind of under the radar release that I think really showcases in some more subtle ways why I think Billie is still so exciting. I mean, I still come back to Happier Than Ever every so often, and that record I still really, really, really like. And I think that she is on an upward trajectory for me. While some people may be losing interest in her more and more as she goes on, I actually think she's getting more and more interesting as a songwriter. And the 30th is a great song. I completely agree with everything you said about that. I think that is also one of her best songs, at the very least lyrically, quite compelling. So yeah, definitely second guitar songs as being an EP worth checking out. My number 3 pick is another collaborative EP. So my number 4 pick was a collaborative EP between Parannoul and Asian Glow, and my number 3 is a collaborative EP between one artist who I was not familiar with at all, and another artist who keen viewers may remember that I shouted out in our overlooked albums of 2021. I had to remember what year last year was for a second year video. That being the artist Home Is Where, an artist based in Florida who is becoming a big name within the kind of current fifth wave Midwest emo scene. What's most notable about Home Is Where and Record Setter, who are the two artists that collaborate on this EP, is that they are both outwardly trans artists who write quite heavily about that experience. And this new EP, which is called Dissection Lesson, is so they're both artists who, although I'm not that familiar with Record Setter, I am familiar with Home Is Where. And it's kind of like Home Is Where are kind of a bit more of a traditional sort of Midwest emo sound, and Record Setter are a bit more along the heavier side of sort of emo and metalcore and that side of things. And this new EP, this is a fucking barn burner. This is music to put on while you are literally burning a transphobe alive. Like, this shit is fucking angry. This might be one of the angriest releases I have heard all year in any context. This is emo violence, screamo, whatever you want to call it. I have never heard Home Is Where in particular. I've never heard them quite as fucking livid as they are here. I mean, the first song is a straight up 1 minute emo violence track that just ends with her basically screaming, "Suck my dick," at the top of her lungs. And it's just utterly unreal of an experience. And you do get in the second song here from Home Is Where, Creationish, which actually has a feature from Soul Glow. You do get a little bit more of the sound that I'm used to from Home Is Where, and you get a little bit of that in Record Setter's contributions as well, a little bit of those more traditional emo aesthetics coming through. But you got 4 songs here, and the energy and the fire and the passion of these artists is never once wavering for even a second. And so if what I've described appeals to you in the slightest, just pure, cathartic, violent music from trans artists who are absolutely at the forefront of their respective niches within that community and music, this is an essential release. It's only an 11-minute EP. It's very short. It's just complete, knock the door down, burn everything in sight, and then run. And so that's my number 3 pick.
Hell yeah. My pick is honestly a bit of a cheat, all things considered, both because this is technically not the first time these songs have been released, and also it's not like a wholly original release, and it's from an artist that is very predictable of me to like. But the EP from one Miss Phoebe Bridgers, So Much Wine. And the bit with this sort of thing is that every year for a while now, Phoebe has released either first a single and then after a single, a full EP, adding a song basically every single year, where she releases a sort of Christmas adjacent song or EP that she uses the like stream money for, or like the money that you use to like buy on like Bandcamp or digitally, to donate to charity, to women's shelters. And last year it added to her not last year, but in 2020, she added her cover of Merle Haggard's If We Make It Through December to her cover of Silent Night, her original song, Christmas Song, and a cover of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. And there's nothing special or exceptional about these series of EPs, really. I mean, it's sort of, you get what it says on the tin. But the thing is that I've listened to these EPs like more than any other thing ever. Like, this is the perfect, like, I work retail, and this is the perfect thing to put on at night when you're walking around the store and you're doing stocking and like all that kind of stuff. It's perfect gloomy holiday music to sort of drown out whatever they're playing on the current stereo, just because I love Phoebe. I love Phoebe's music. I love Phoebe's voice. And the thing is that the reason I put this so high on here is because this feels sort of like the final form of the Christmas EP, because it has a cover of the new additions here are So Much Wine, the first song on here, which is terrific, and I think actually has backing vocals from Paul Mescal on it, and it's a terrific song, very Phoebe Bridgers-esque. But the sort of star of the show here is the single that she released earlier this year is on here, which is a cover of the Tom Waits song Day After Tomorrow. And if you know me, I am an immense fan of Tom Waits, and I fucking love Real Gone. And wouldn't you know it, Day After Tomorrow is probably my favorite song on that album, and this song makes me unbearably emotional. I mean, in its original context as well, but the sort of added frailty of Phoebe's voice on this, it's like it's genuinely a difficult listen, and I've listened to this song like 100, not exaggerating, at least times. Just the way that she adds sort of atmospherics into this track, the sort of very subtle touches she puts on the production are fantastic. There's some like tiny little, like there's a bit of a key change in the second half, but it's a song about a soldier who's gone off to war, who's writing back home, talking about the day after tomorrow, supposedly when he's going to get on a plane and come back home. And a lot of Tom Waits' writing being very esoteric, you're not really sure if this soldier is perhaps in denial and just doing this as a coping mechanism, and he's not actually coming home tomorrow. And the sort of captured ephemera of existing in this state is so well put with Phoebe's voice, and the fact that someone younger performing it sort of adds to the sort of youthful naivete that's inherent with the song that just sort of carries throughout the entire EP, really. Christmas Song on here is our original Phoebe song, which really real ones will know that the book that I wrote last year is called If We Make It Through December, named after the Merle Haggard song. And the song that I quote at the very start of that is Christmas Song by Phoebe Bridgers, which is just a very traditionally gloomy holiday song written by Phoebe. It's a great little song. I love it. And she just does a great rendition of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. I'm not like over the moon about the Silent Night rendition, just because it has Matt Berninger in the background as a radio host who's like saying a bunch of like topical news things on it. But this is like 2 minutes long. And also Fiona Apple does backing vocal harmonies with Phoebe on this, so that's a bit of an interesting novelty. But this is a perfect, like, you want to get into the season of Christmas, but you also kind of hate Christmas, which is kind of where I'm at, where I'm constantly surrounded by the over commercialization and I'm constantly sort of inundated with all of this. It is a perfect coping EP that I just go back to. It's like a warm blanket or a mug of hot cocoa. And it's basically the exact same thing as the EP that I already loved before, and it has one of the best Tom Waits songs of all time on it. So I'm winning.
It's literal you bait. It's literal Jake.
It is.
It couldn't.
It is, and I take it.
You couldn't have been baited harder, my friend. And I salute Miss Bridger's commitment to the cause. My number 2 pick is the most recent release on my list, a very recent discovery, actually. I only became aware of this because it got front paged very briefly on Rate Your Music. It is a new EP from a South Korean post-metal band called Jambinai. They've put out a number of albums that all look very interesting to me and all seem like they're very much up my alley. They have kind of been pitched to me as like halfway between Envy and Panopticon, which, you know, there's you can't really sell me much harder, to be honest. And so I checked out
you bait.
Yeah, and I checked out this new EP, which is called Apparition, came out about a month ago, and I was immediately taken by how, first of all, this is not really all that much post-metal, it's much closer to post-rock, but it's a very interesting fusion of heavier post-rock aesthetics and folk music aesthetics, particularly Korean folk music aesthetics. So whereas something like Panopticon integrates into metal the aesthetics of bluegrass and more Americana folk stylings, Jambinai incorporates a more sort of Eastern stylings of folk music. You do have instruments like banjo. You have various stringed instruments that show up on here, not all of which I can name off the top of my head. And you have a very prominent featuring of the fiddle, of the violin, essentially, which is doing this incredible heavy lifting for the melodic core of this album. So it's very atmospheric. Some point it's quite slow moving, but all of the songs feel very distinct and unique, and they let you embody a space where different instruments are interacting and where arrangements are building and breathing in ways that I don't think very many bands working in the post-rock realm really have the patience for or the inclination to move towards. I think it's just a really unique and idiosyncratic take on on a genre of music that is typically associated a lot with Western bands, but here filtered through something distinctly different and more exciting. And it also has some killer track titles as well. Once More, From That Frozen Bottom, From the Place Been Erased, Until My Wings Turn to Ashes, and the colossal closing track, which is the absolute highlight, Candlelight in Colossal Darkness. Look, it's a fantastic EP. I feel like if you're going to know by this point if this is for you or not, but I really enjoyed what this band were bringing to the table texturally. I really want to go and check out their previous records. I've listened to this a few times, and each time I still find myself continually equally taken by this really distinct take on what are generally fairly played out genre aesthetics. So yeah, Jambinai, Apparition, my second favorite EP of the year.
Segueing flawlessly into my choice, which is the newest EP from Panopticon, released this year, called The End is Growing Near. Now, of course, if you're familiar with the podcast, last year, 2021, our album of the year was the most recent Panopticon release, and again, Into the Light. And you'll know that, generally speaking, we are huge fans of Austin Lund's and this project. The entire discography really is just an absolute treat, and this EP is no exception. Except the thing is with this is that this is actually an archival release, and that this does not sound a whole lot like the stuff that he's made recently. Like the last two Panopticon albums are really, really kind of overbearing with their production, to both of those albums' benefit, in my opinion. Whereas this is a little bit more in line with some of the earlier stuff. Not quite like the self-titled or Collapse necessarily, but I would say in between Kentucky and Roads to the North is sort of the sound that this harkens back to, where it's a little bit like, it's not necessarily clean, but it is still very harsh. Like the atmospheric black metal is certainly front and center, but I think that there's a little bit more death metal leanings on here as well, like there is on something like Autumn Eternal, especially in stuff like the drums. And the two songs on here, Haunted America 2 and The End is Growing Near, are both fantastic, and they're both particularly, like, you know, Haunted America 2 is a staggering 8-minute long sort of absolute beat down some of the more politically aggressive stuff that Austin's made, again kind of harkening back to the sampling stuff that he would do on Kentucky. But it's the title track to me that stands as one of Panopticon's best songs, in my opinion. This is just an absolute fucking, like, typically speaking, Panopticon's pieces are just longer generally, but this is almost 5 minutes of just an assaultive black metal track. And it's nice to see Austin in this more stripped back and kind of simple-minded mode, just because this EP is comparatively a bit more lizard brainy in its appeal, and that if you just want something that fucking hits with a lot of impact, it's less, less atmospheric, more black metal. And that, in many respects, I would say that this EP might be a good gateway into Panopticon, and that it is a very digestible release. It's very short, 2 songs that showcase the versatility of the band very well. This is just a very quintessential release from the band, and I am super excited because in 2023 we are likely going to get 2 new Panopticon albums, and I'm going to see them live here in Kentucky with Morgan.
I love that we've gotten to the point where all that Panopticon has to do to make it onto one of our year-end lists is just release something, like anything. Just, it can be 15 years old. Release it and you're in.
And I will eat that shit up. I am a whore. Feed me your slop, daddy.
On that note, my number 1 EP of the year. And you know what? This is actually the most obscure release that I think either of us are going to be shouting out today. It kind of, because it's an EP, I think, and also because it's the first project under a new name for this artist, who already is, fairly underground and not necessarily known as well for her music as for her music writing. But hopefully that does change, because this new EP is, and I'm not even saying this with any amount of reservation, absolutely my favorite EP of the year. It is the new EP from The Answers in Between, which is the project from one Miss Hannah Jocelyn, formerly known as Fell from the Tree, whose last record under that name we reviewed in January of 2021. She is reformed under the name The Answers in Between, and Self Talk, which is the name of the EP, is the debut release of that new name. And I think it's the best music that Hannah has put out to date. It is the most exciting music that Hannah has put out to date. It is the most it is the biggest step forward for her, I think, in carving out her own sound. Because while, as much as I loved Enough, which was this kind of icy Postal Service-esque bedroom pop album with, distinctly moving trans themes, obviously, given the nature of the artist, The Answers in Between takes all of those aspects of Hannah's personality, of the real kind of intimate personal nature of the way that she writes, and kind of blows them up. Because this is, while of course still produced on a budget, and while Hannah of course is still progressing and building her sound, this is basically, compared to the Fell for the Tree album anyway, this thing is booming. Like, compared to that album, this EP, the songs on this EP are massive. You have fantastic, more sort of conventionally friendly and familiar music for Hannah, like the lead song Can't Be One, which I really, really enjoyed. You also have kind of slightly huger sounding, more conventional indie pop songs like Okay, Individually Speaking, and Sculpture. You have my favorite song on the EP, the kind of fragmented and just devastating kind of electronic ballad Doppelgangers, which I absolutely love. And you have the massive Hotel Room, the fantastic, epic final 5-minute song on this EP. There's not a single track on this EP that I can point to and say, this is significantly weaker than what surrounds it. Hannah has refined these songs to a T. She's worked on them clearly very lovingly. And the result is an EP that is just one of my most listened projects of the year in general, to be honest. I listened to this record a whole heck of a lot when it came out in April and in the months after that as well. I have never gotten sick of it, and there are hooks on this thing, especially on songs like Doppelgangers and Okay, that have continued to stay in my head throughout the year. Hannah is an artist who is still slowly amassing and building a portfolio of music that I believe is going to stand up as some of the best indie pop of its era. But get in on the ground floor with the answers in between as well. It really feels like in changing the name of this project and in blowing up her own ambitions for the project and doing something so much bigger and more fulsome than anything that's come before, Hannah really is making a declarative statement that she's here to continue restlessly pushing her sound, continuing to stretch her ambitions in terms of the scale of how her music can sound, all while retaining the kind of intimacy and sort of deeply felt personal tone to the lyricism that made her earlier music feel so easy to connect with, I think. And so, yeah, the Self-Talk by The Answers in Between, essential pop EP, some of my favorite pop songs of the year on this thing. I know it's going to sound a little bit like I'm blowing smoke up Hannah's ass because I know Hannah, but genuinely, it just is an EP that I've connected with that much. And I've come back to it a lot. And I consider it to be her best work yet, as I said. So, yeah, definitely one of the most underground and maybe one of the least heard releases we're talking about today. I'm going to make sure that there's a Bandcamp link in the description for it. In fact, I'll put Bandcamp links in the description for everything we talk about today, so you can actually check them out and support the artists. But yeah, this one in particular, because it's maybe an artist you're most likely to not be familiar with, if there's anything on my list that you check out today, absolutely make sure it's this one. Great EP.
Huge cosign for me. If we had perhaps combined our lists to have shared entries, I think that would make it quite highly on mine as well. But my number one is going to be a sort of shared entry between two EPs from the same artist. And again, you've been watching the podcast, you probably know what is coming. That being the two releases this year from electronic artist Burial, the Antidawn EP and Streetlands. And you'll know that these releases, recent releases from Burial, sort of post tunes compilation Burial, focus on sort of ambient soundscapes, almost more collage than they are like genuine bona fide linear progression music. And that has had its limits with lots of people. That's led these releases to be received far more lukewarmly than anything that he's made in the past. And that is certainly true. I cannot promise that people will connect with this stuff in any way that they might have connected with stuff that's on more like Untrue or even the self-titled, for example. However, as a lover of this kind of sort of music that just feels like it is, again, building a world more than anything else, that really appreciates the journey that music like this can take you on, I have not been able to stop listening to either of these since their release. Antidawn came out much earlier in the year, and honestly, this is a pretty substantial project. Like, it clocks in at about 44 minutes, and it's like 6 tracks? Five. It's 5 tracks long. And they're all pretty substantial pieces. And frankly, if I included this on my albums of the year list, it would land very, very, very highly. This is an EP that I've gone back to time and time again, just because it is perfect mood music. It's perfect music to listen to at night, perfect music to listen to when you want to actively engage with something. And as background music, it has a bit of a versatility there to it, but I get more out of it when I am actively engaging with it, just because this EP in particular does such a great job at building a real tangible environment in the same way that I feel like the Tunes compilation does. Is that that sort of felt like a sort of journey that takes you from this like really sort of primordial place into this nocturnal sort of city soundscape place that felt more indicative of the scene that Burial's music would be played in. And this feels a lot, it feels like it's drawing from some of those same similar aesthetics, where it's sort of building a dark urban environment that really feels like you can almost reach out and touch it, and it just sort of feels like you're being led through it, and it feels dark and mysterious and strange and ghostly. But there's also something very quietly comforting about this, that when I get to tracks like New Love or Upstairs Flat, there's a real arc that feels like it's completed once these tracks find their end. And it really just, it's one of the most satisfying experiences that I've had with Burial's music, like as a whole. Like I would say that these are some of my favorite releases that he's made, period. And Streetlands is almost like an EP that I like just as much, but for completely opposite reasons. Because the three pieces here, Hospital Chapel, Streetlands, and Exakind, are like so ephemeral. They feel like they're explorations of liminal spaces, places that are like empty but uncanny and feel like they have there is a tangibility to them, but this one feels a little bit more formless. But I find that to be very evocative in its own way, and it doesn't have the same kind of A to B journey that Antidawn has. It's really just more of a fluctuating, constant sort of exploration of maybe like one particular place, but I found it to be just as riveting of an experience. And it is very difficult to sort of put in strict terms why either of these EPs work for me the way that they do. I would primarily judge them as, like, again, bits of ambient music more than I would judge them as what Burial is traditionally known for. But these have been some of the most valuable experiences I've had with music this year in a way that I never really saw coming, just because this is a side of Burial's sound that I really latched onto, but never expected him to elaborate upon as an artist. I just sort of thought that this would be part and parcel of the holistic experience that was the Tunes compilation and the music that he made over the past decade. But it seems to be a direction that, while not everybody is on board with, and I, again, completely understand why, as this kind of minimalism just won't be as effective with everyone as it will be some people, but it has been deeply comforting in a way that I can't truly put into words plainly. But I know that there are some people who are going to listen to this and you are just going to get it. You just have to adjust your expectations a little bit accordingly. But I highly recommend them just to see what you end up thinking of them. Just, go in with a bit of an open mind. And I promise that you will get something out of, especially Antidawn. That's the one where I think the more grounded nature of the journey it takes you on is an easier sell than something that is a little bit more esoteric like Streetlands.
Yeah, the way I think of these releases is it's like they're like field recordings, except everything is artificially constructed. So like it's like they feel like field recordings, but they're made with samples and they're made with synthetic instrumentation and they're made with all kinds of, technical computer stuff, essentially. But they feel like they are recording a real-time document of a space. Streetlands, I haven't spent as much time with. It's much more recent and hasn't quite landed for me quite yet. It feels structure at least much more akin to his 2010s EPs where it's like three distinct pieces. Whereas Antidawn, it feels so much different to basically anything else Burial's put out, because as you say, Antidawn feels like this singular holistic journey. You don't even really feel the distinctions between the tracks on Antidawn. It just feels like one single holistic piece that starts in one place and ends somewhere very different. And I will say Antidawn, which incidentally came out on the 6th of January, so the earliest release of the year, really, that we've talked about, this EP has grown on me an awful lot over the year, and it's purely by having it as something to experience in my life and letting myself kind of submit to it. I think, Jake, you have a unique perspective on Burial because you're someone who came on board around the time of the Tunes compilation, where you haven't had the years and years of waiting for scraps, essentially, which is what he's been given us.
Yeah.
Ever since 2013. So the last kind of conventional sort of garage related recording that he released was 2013's Rival Dealer. And ever since then, every year or sometimes every other year, it's just been these little patchwork EPs of sound collage ambient music. And it's stuff that has felt for a long time anyway, for a lot of Burial fans, myself included, to be, interesting and decent and enjoyable on a certain level, but also kind of too freeform and too contextless to really get a whole lot out of, which is one of the successes of the Tunes compilation's first disc, is that it gave context for so much of that music, and it put it in a new, and it structured it in a new way that made it feel like it was building to something, that it was all kind of a part of a journey that was taking you from one place to another. And that's the great success of Antidawn, is that it does things that the tracks on the Street Forest EP and on the Subtemple EP did, but it gives them a sense of purpose and a sense of movement and a sense of direction. I feel like that those songs, when they were initially released as standalone tracks, didn't really have. So Antidawn gives that sort of music more structure, and it really needs it, because even compared to things like State Forest and Beach Fires and Subtemple and all those kinds of songs on Tunes, this is even more formless for Burial, even less musical, even more purely about space and reverb and texture and sound, and just ebbing and flowing essentially of sound. And you can go upwards of 10 minutes without a single kind of percussive beat or anything of that nature, right? And for people like me who came up on Burial in the era where what his most defining feature were his percussive sounds, right? The beats that he made, you know, it's been a long time of getting used to that no longer being a huge interest of his. But Antidawn, I think, is a really successful execution of this new interest and this new textural style that he is working within in a way that feels like all of these pieces are a part of something bigger. And the sense you get from the beginning of Strange Neighborhood to the emotional end of Upstairs Flat is really of a kind of journey through the night, essentially, through the night in the, you know, in the London streets, in the South London streets, essentially, which is the environment that Burial's always, I think, sought to evoke. And Streetlands is kind of, yeah, like you say, it's more like individual pieces that evoke liminal spaces where people sort of once were but aren't now. Whereas, I don't know, Antidawn to me feels like the presence of people, even if it's far away or even if it's ghostly or whatever, is still there. There's a beating heart to that project that I've connected to. So yeah, if you're a long-time Burial listener and you really came up on the Untrue and the Kindred era stuff, this may not captivate you in the same way, but I would definitely co-sign alongside Jake and encourage really giving this particular era of Burial, just letting yourself kind of submit to it and seeing if it takes you to places like it has for us. Don't go into it expecting to, you know, have your, you know, your socks knocked off, or to be like, you know, completely to get that classic two-step garage dub sound that Burial is known for. This is something very different, and he is continuing to carve into this niche and try to mine different effects and feelings from it. And I think he's doing it to great effect. So yeah, that's our favorite EPs of the year, our respective top fives. And as you kind of would have got the gist, we're definitely backing each other up on a lot of these picks. But we want to know from you what your favorite EPs were. What are some of the EPs that have gone under the radar, artists you think put out great projects on this format this year that you believe deserve a shout out? Let us know in the comments below, and we will check those projects out, and we will let you know what we think as well. So yeah, please stick around as well. We're going to be talking about the most overlooked albums of the year very shortly as well. Records we didn't get a chance to review properly in a formal setting on Jams and Tea, but that Jake and I love very dearly. And then, of course, we're going to be talking about our favorite albums and songs of the year beyond that as well. So plenty more lists to come before the year is out on Jams and Tea. Until next time, though, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Tesco, every little helps.